Good morning, everyone. We're glad to see you this morning, and we are excited to revisit the topic of virtual IEP meetings with you today during our coffee chat. For those of you who are new to us, we are the Diverse Learners Cooperative. We are a nonprofit here in Nashville, Tennessee, and we focus on improving outcomes for diverse learners by providing teachers and leaders with professional learning, resources, and networks that they can use to connect with other people and hopefully increase their retention within the classroom and school communities that they serve. My name is Mary, and I am a special education program specialist. And today I'm going to be walking you through some frameworks for hosting and facilitating effective virtual IEP meetings. We're also going to review some high leverage strategies that you can use to prepare for these meetings so that your meetings are not only smooth and effective, but also meaningful for all stakeholders involved. We'll talk through some goals of these meetings, as well as some barriers you might experience with virtual IEP meetings, as well as review strategies for success. So this is actually the second time that we are discussing virtual IEP meetings on our DLC coffee chats. The first time that we visited this topic was back in the spring of 2020, when schools had just been closed for an indefinite period of time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And at this time in the spring, when we had discussed virtual IEP meetings, they were still a very brand new topic. No one had really engaged in this process before. Platforms that you see here on the screen were ones that we had maybe heard of, used once or twice, and now, as you know, they're part of our daily repertoire. In the spring, schools were unsure of what to do next because we weren't sure how long school buildings were going to remain closed in the spring. And yet there were still IEPs, deadlines, and compliance that we had to keep up with in order to serve students well while school buildings were closed. That meant that IEP teams were having to meet virtually in order to figure out what to do next, to not only make sure that those technical compliance deadlines were met, but that students were getting the appropriate supports that they needed while schools were tentatively closed. The DLC supported with this work by providing resources such as the ones that are linked here, including the IEP revision tool, as well as sample service scenarios to help schools navigate how to translate those in-person services to virtual learning environments. Now, even though those virtual IEP meetings were happening, they often felt a little bit chaotic or a little bit rushed, mostly because we were trying to come up with a plan when there were no clear answers. So in our original coffee chat, we suggested a 4-step plan that was supposed to be a temporary patch to help schools make sure that they were completely covered and that every student's needs were accounted for as they planned for virtual learning. We helped schools to navigate through which IEPs to prioritize, especially for students who were transitioning maybe to a new campus or a new grade level, and helped to figure out which students were going to need the most supports while learning from home. But over time, now that we've seen schools participating in virtual IEP meetings for the last couple of months during this new school year, we've gained a new perspective and wanted to share with you an alternative framework approach that we think is really successful in helping schools and IEP teams to collaborate and create really individualized plans for students, regardless of the setting that they are learning in. So now our meetings can be much more collaborative. With this framework, we hope that the meetings are conversations in which meaningful input is gathered from all stakeholders. So that includes families and parents, administrators, general education teachers working with the students, and even the students themselves. So the way that we're going to share this today is to go through the framework with you. So we're going to establish some goals of an effective IEP meeting virtually, identify the possible barriers that you might experience, as well as talk through some strategies that you can use to mitigate those barriers in your practice. So as we go through today, keep these 3 steps in mind, and we will show these symbols throughout so that you can keep on track with us. So the first goal that we recommend when having a virtual IEP meeting is to set a really positive tone from the start. We want to make sure that all team members are prepared to actively contribute by providing constructive ideas, focusing on collaboration and student success as the ultimate goal. We also want to make sure that we work the clock. A lot of our schedules are limited and we only have so much time with families, but we want to make sure that our time is used really well and results in a meaningful plan for the student. We want to make sure that all sections of the IEP are covered, including time for discussions and questions and real-time revisions. We also want to make sure that ultimately, as a result of our virtual IEP meeting, we have a really individualized support plan for a student. It's a unique program based on their needs, the quantitative and qualitative data that we've gathered, and includes creative school solutions to navigate what we are doing, whether virtually or in person with the student during this time. Now, all of that sounds really great, and that is the goal of what we'd like to implement, but there are always some barriers that we might come up against as we plan for these virtual IEP meetings. These are just some of the common barriers that we have heard from teachers throughout the last few months who have been running these virtual IEP meetings. We've heard about technology malfunctions or struggling to maintain a good conversation flow over Zoom or over virtual platforms in which you're communicating. We've also heard about difficulties with sharing documents, making sure that everybody has access to all of the documents needed while also participating in the video call. It can be hard to manage all the different schedules, especially if students are learning virtually while family members or other stakeholders are trying to participate in meetings. So we've heard that meeting times can be interrupted or can start late, which can really interrupt the flow of the meeting. We also know that parents sometimes feel uneasy because they're not quite sure what to ask when the team poses a question like, do you have questions? And so we want to make sure that we think through all the possible barriers that may occur during our IEP meetings so that we can proactively plan to mitigate those as much as possible so that we can know what is potentially coming up, so that we can prepare to either prevent that from happening or have an appropriate way of getting through that situation during the meeting. So let's talk through what some of those strategies look like. So for setting the tone, we have some things that you can do before the meeting as well as during. Before, we have found it really helpful to share norms or commitments for the conversation and tone of the meeting. This gets everybody on the same page, and they're great to refer back to during the meeting if things feel like they're getting off track. So these can be that you focus on student success or that everybody uses respectful tones with other people. And we've linked some examples here for you. We also want to make sure that everybody is prepared to describe student strengths. Obviously, during an IEP meeting, we are going to discuss present levels of performance and where the student is and where we want them to be. But we also need to focus on leveraging the strengths that they demonstrate so that we can make sure that we are using those strengths to our advantage to make sure that the student can experience success throughout the year. During the meeting, we want to maintain respectful interactions. And so this looks like making proper introductions at the start of the meeting, including with title or preferred pronouns. We can also redirect to meeting goals at any time. And so we want to make sure that these goals are established so that if we need them, we can refer back to them during the meeting. These are some linked tools that you will receive in the slide deck when it goes out to your emails later today. But for example, these are some IEP meeting norms that you can use, as well as an article about all the different types of strengths in students. This could be an article that would be helpful to share either with parents or with general education teachers ahead of time to help them brainstorm what attributes they see in the student that we are discussing in our meeting. The next thing that you can do is to work the clock really well, again, both before the meeting and during. Before the meeting, this looks like making sure that everybody knows what's expected of them so that everybody comes prepared. Typically, we recommend that teachers or the person leading the meeting sends a really tailored invitation Outlook protocol, whether you're using Outlook or some other Google platform, but essentially sending a meeting invitation that details not only when and where the meeting is taking place, but also what that specific team member should bring to discuss and to support the student. We would also recommend with this invitation sharing a really comprehensive agenda that goes over each section of the IEP meeting, as well as provides some guiding questions that are going to be discussed so everyone knows how to gather their thoughts and be prepared to share their responses. During the meeting, we do have to make sure that our pacing is efficient, but we do want to make sure that we cover everything that we need to cover. So what we recommend is somebody to support the meeting leader or facilitator by keeping time or taking notes according to the agenda so that we can stay on track. We also recommend virtually slightly deviating from the IEP. Again, many of you are familiar with how many pages and pages of IEP notes there are. We recommend using supplemental tools to help you convey all of this information in a clearer and more understandable way. So that looks like different slides templates or a summary table that shows the goals, present levels, and services all summarized from the IEP, but in one generalized place. So it's easier to communicate and understand and discuss with stakeholders. These are some examples. On the left here, you'll see the sample invitation protocol, and on the right, you'll see the sample agenda with the guiding questions. Again, both of these resources are linked. So when you receive this slide deck, all you have to do is click on the images to access those documents. Finally, like we said, the ultimate goal is to create a very individualized plan for the student we are meeting about. So before the meeting, we want to make sure that we are really soliciting parent input through a variety of means. This might look like texting them or emailing them a list of questions or even a Google form. That can be a great way to consolidate all of your information in one place and keep up with parent input and share it with other team members as well. You could also call the parent if that's their preferred method of communication and just ask them some questions using a structured interview form. During the meeting, we want to make sure that we are weaving the quantitative data that we've gathered with this qualitative source of information that we've gathered through the interviews, whether those are interviews with parents or teachers or the student themselves. So not only do we want to focus on using data and graphs to help communicate progress and outcomes, but we also want to make sure that we are checking for understanding frequently and referring back to those ideas and questions that we solicited from other stakeholders to make sure that everybody's voices are heard and all of everybody's questions are answered at the same time. We also then want to use all this information to design services that are really unique for students and based on their need so that we can anticipate getting them to the goals that we set for them within the annual IEP year. On the left here, you'll see the sample survey, and the right, you'll see a guide that we've developed that you can use to help you decide what those services might look like, especially if your school or your team is transitioning between different types of learning right now, whether that's in-person or hybrid or fully remote learning. What we hope that you take away from this is that all of these strategies are designed to be used virtually, but they're also really great strategies to use in person. Again, we know a lot of our school teams are up in the air about what their year is going to look like in terms of whether they're going to stay virtual, whether they're going back in person. And we don't really know how IEP meetings are going to look moving forward. But we do know that the strategies that we've shared are ones that are really high leverage that you can use regardless of the type of setting that your meeting is in. So as you work through your IEP meetings and as you're planning ahead for your future, we want you to remain focused on the goals. And that is really to have positive mindsets that are going to result in student success. These are just a couple of mindsets that we recommend that everybody on the team have, and these could even be shared with teams ahead of time or used as your norms. So we want to focus on being collaborative and flexible in order to be student focused and making plans that will result in their success. Again, we recommend that if you can identify all the possible barriers that you've either experienced in the past with meetings you already held or ones that you might anticipate happening, rather than asking ourselves, why aren't my meetings going well? Why doesn't this seem to be working? Instead, think of, okay, how can I take these challenges that I'm experiencing and translate those into solutions that I can plan for proactively and share with other team members so that I'm setting myself up for success in order to have an effective and meaningful meeting. The most important thing that we want you to remember, though, is that this is not supposed to be done alone. Yes, you may be the IEP team lead or the meeting facilitator, but really together, the goal is to make a plan for a student and including the effort and participation of all members of the IEP team. So as we wrap up today, we are going to take questions in 1 minute, but I wanted to let you know that we will have our final coffee chat next Friday, December 11th, and we will be discussing how we can use technology tools within our classroom, whether that's like Alexa or Siri or Google Home, to be able to build student independence. So we hope you join us. All right, we are going to take some questions right now.